Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Carlson, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator here at Advisicon, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. Here at Advisicon, we are a group of authors, teachers, consultants, and technologists offering training in Microsoft technologies, project management, and methodology. With attending any of our training sessions, we offer PDUs as we are a registered education provider with the Project Management Institute. And at the close of today's session, I'll give some instruction on how to claim your PDUs and how to get in contact with us for any other questions you may have. Now, before we get started, I'll go over a few things so you know how to participate in today's event. Please review the control panel that should be on the top right of your screen. The audience is muted during this session, so in order to ask questions, you will need to submit them in the questions window of the control panel. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded on the Advisicon YouTube channel for those who could not attend today's session live. Please note that any questions or comments submitted will not be displayed, nor will any of your personal information be shared. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our instructor for the day, Brent Lamb, Advisicon's Technical Project Advisor. So without further ado, I will hand this over and we can get started.
Thank you for the introduction and setting this webinar up, Amanda. Hello and welcome everyone. This is our Microsoft webinar on Scrum and Agile Planning with Microsoft Project 2019. My name is Brent Lamb and I will be your guide today, so to speak, as we get into a live demonstration of Microsoft Project 2019 and kind of setting up your initial Agile planning. At the end, if we do have any time left, we'll field any questions that you may have, but it's going to be pretty tight today. We've got a lot to show you in just 30 minutes. This is just a preview today, so we aren't going to go do a deep dive into any particular area, but the good news is that there is a deep dive webinar coming up on the 16th that will go into all the details, and Amanda will cover more about that at the end of this presentation. A little bit about me: I've been in portfolio and program management for approximately 20 years. Looks like I just carbon dated myself. At the last 10 of those years, the last 10 have been a really strong focus on Agile and helping organizations with their transformations into Agile. So I've got a few tips and tricks, and I'm going to share those with you as we go along that will hopefully help you out, and you won't have to learn those the hard way like I did. Okay, so for today, I'm going to walk you through an overview of how you can set up and manage your Agile projects and really leverage the power of MS Project to do so. What I really like about Microsoft Project, and that differentiates it from other products, is that whether you're waterfall, you're Agile, or some hybrid methodology, Wagile, which don't feel bad if you are, because almost every organization I've ever consulted for is some sort of hybrid. Microsoft can really handle that entire gamut, and that's what I really, really like about it. Okay, so we are going to begin with just a real quick skim over on SDLC versus methodology. I'm just going to throw that out there, especially for anyone that's new, to get that terminology down. Then we'll jump into live Microsoft project and showing the Agile views, administration, setting up your project initially, creating your backlog, your stories, your storyboards, and then customizing the look and feel and what you can see and what you can't, so that it may match your enterprise the way you're doing it now, or if your teams already, have a storyboard on the wall with sticky notes, you can match those up. So it's really nice. If we have a little bit of time left, we'll skim over, just do a quick flyby over the reporting section, show you kind of the dashboards, what's available, so you can spit those out for your product owner or your stakeholders. And at the end, like I said, if we do have any time left, we're happy to field any questions. Okay, so SDLC versus methodology. This is actually something, believe it or not, that comes up a lot, especially with larger organizations that have stage gate processes or a PMO, like placemat, that all the projects must go through. The reality is that if you asked 100 PMO trainers or experienced, project or program managers what the definitions of SDLC or methodology or any other terminologies, you're going to get 100 different answers. So this really is my version and my take and from my experience, and that is SDLC is really a framework. It's the process defining those tasks, those steps performed at each part of the development process. Sometimes a very simplified way I explain it to my clients is that SDLC is what every single requirement needs to go through from start to finish. Methodology is how you perform that process. So with waterfall, for example, all requirements will go through these phases together from start to finish. With Agile, it's small iterations repeated over and over until you have completed all requirements. But in both cases, they each utilize these same phases. Now, you may have different ones. It doesn't have to be requirements, design, develop. Some do, initiation, research, planning. Either way, you perform that same, but with Agile, you're an iteration instead of one big bang. Okay, so let's jump right on over into Microsoft Project. And you can see here, when you launch Microsoft Project 2019, you're going to get this screen to open up a new project, right? And so if you haven't used something since maybe early 2016 project, you're going to notice you have this sprints project here now. You have this waterfall project. So for today, we're going to jump right into the sprints project template and show what that looks like. And the first thing you're going to notice that's different from launching just a classic, empty blank project sheet is that you jump right into the sprints planning board. I think most of us are used to jumping in, opening a project, and you come to this task entry board. So it jumps in that, no worries. I'm going to show you how you can navigate through that. But first and foremost, I'm sort of an Excel geek. So the first thing that I always customize on my Microsoft project is I like the entry bar. That's that bar that goes between your ribbon and your workspace. And if you use Excel as much as I do, you really like that. It's like, it's like comfort food seeing that there. It's just a little bit of niceness. So you go up here to File, you come to the bottom options, and you'll go to Display, which is the second setting down. And you'll notice here at the bottom is Entry Bar. So I always check that. And once you do that, it's the default from then on. And you'll see now here at the top, we have that nice entry bar spanning. And so when you click in a field, you can have the choice of either entering there or coming back up in here and entering it up there, okay? So now that you have project launch, and maybe you do or you don't want the entry bar, now let's get into how do we set up our sprints. You'll notice at the top tab to the far right above the ribbon, we have a sprints tab now, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and click into that. And you'll notice the ribbon cleans up really nicely, which I think Microsoft did a fantastic job of doing that. Not only does it make it easy, but I think it goes along with the Agile, mantra of light, clean, quick, fast. You'll notice at the top that we have 3 buttons right together: task board, planning, sprint, and each one of those has a downward caret, okay? So you can drop those down, and in each one of those cases, you can have a board view or a sheet view. And we're going to get to those 3 in just a second. And you're going to work left to right, left being your backlog. It's going to be higher level. Planning is going to be your multiple sprints planning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever sprint you're on. And then lastly, as we move to the right, that will be the individual detailed sprint planning. But before you do that, what I recommend is you go to this manage area, this manage button. You click on it, and it's going to pop up a window. And you'll see here it has sprints 1, 2, 3. And at the bottom of this window, you'll see this is where you can add a sprint. And you can either choose to hard-code a date, but Microsoft, in trying to make our life easier, it's going to automatically put the next day from the last sprint day for us, okay? So you can come up here and you can see the sprint 1, 2, 3. You can see the duration of those sprints, the start and finish date. And obviously you can drop these down and customize these any way you want, just like a normal Microsoft project. You can click on the length and just do the up or down button, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Now, for some of you who either are brand new to Microsoft project or maybe have never gone and worked beyond the standard length periods, you'll see EW. That stands for elapsed. So what elapsed means is it's an entire calendar day. It's a 24. There's no constraints on it. By default, Microsoft Project has one day as 8 hours for its resources, right? And it's Monday through Friday. With elapsed, whether it's an elapsed day or an elapsed week or an elapsed month, it's the entire day, Monday through Sunday. So just be aware of that you're going to choose this. And if I go, say, Wednesday, if I choose back here maybe the 6th, you'll see up here that our sprint ends on a Sunday, okay? So just be aware of that when you're configuring it, that you're gonna have to deal with the elapse. The other thing you can do up here is you can click into the sprint box and you can rename these sprints anything you want it to be, okay? Most of us do just stick with 1, 2, 3. Tip number 1 that I have that I've experienced in my time is that if you have a brand new Agile team or your team is working on a whole new product or something you've never worked on before, I personally really like 4-week sprints. I know 2 weeks is the norm, but especially for a new team, that 2 weeks can be very, very fast. You have to do your sprint planning, your development, your testing, your deployment, your retrospective, and then your next sprint planning all in that time. 4 weeks gives you a little bit more breathing room to operate in, and it also, in fact, cuts down some of your ceremonies, such as the retrospectives. Instead of having 2 retrospectives in 2 sprints, you now only have 1 retrospective. So in my opinion, it makes it a little easier, but again, you should customize it, and there's certainly value to 2-week sprints, especially if you're doing maintenance and enhancement work where, say, you have a website and you're doing really small but incremental builds to that, and you're giving value immediately to your customer, your clients, or your product, your business part of your teams. Once you set up your sprint, and again, you can add sprints if you like, you hit OK, and we're going to go to the sprint, and the first thing we're going to do is go into this task board. This is our backlog. Now, anytime you click the icons above here to the top left, that's going to take you into the board view. To get into the sheet view, you would have to drop it down and go there, and that would give you the sheet view. Same thing, different view. So this is where you would automatically land up. Now, for the backlog, I really like the sheet view because you're seeing everything laid out. You can customize your columns any way you want. I'm going to switch over to a project that I just started entering in stuff already, and we're over here sprint, we're in the task, we're in the sheet view. So you can see everything out. And you know, if you've worked with Microsoft Project, this operates the same way that it would have if you were over in Classic Project with the task entry view. You can add new columns, you can drag and drop these to make sense to do in the order that is best for your team. Now, I like this view only in the task board, this backlog view. I like this. I don't, for this area, just be careful because this area here, this is your backlog. If you start moving your stories or your cards across here, it's going to affect your sprint setup, okay? So what I like to tell our teams is that you use this view as a dashboard, and you'll see what I mean in a minute when we get down to the individual sprint plannings. These cards here will automatically be updated in their progress as they're actually updated within the sprint, okay? So just be a little bit aware of that. Let's go back to the task board sheet view. So a couple things. You can add a new column and you're going to drop that down, and just like in the way you've been using project for traditional, waterfall or however you've been using it, you get these default column types that are already there. So you can choose that, but you'll notice that what I have got on mine is I've got one for points and I've got one for categories. Epics, features, user stories. You may or may not use those, okay? And when I come into that field and I drop it down, I have selections available, and only these selections are available, right? And your team may use whatever points, I prefer 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, but you may like the Fibonacci, the 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. It's too much math for me. So I choose to do something a little bit easier, but regardless, whatever it is, you want to do that. So how do you add these custom columns, and on top of that, make it so that it works for the customized way for your team? That's very simple. Go back up to the ribbon, go back up to the tab Project, click on Project, and you'll see right in the middle, there is custom fields. So we're going to click on that. And you're going to notice it brings up all these customized fields. Now you can see where I added points already. So you're going to come over to the type. If you're adding a number type, I go to number, and from this drop down you can do text. They have a whole different one. I'm going to choose number, and I'm going to show you why that's important in just a second. So choose number as the type and remember that. Then all you need to do is click on one of these available fields here, and you can either come to the bottom right here in the middle and click rename, and you name it points, let's just call it points ZZZZZ. Okay, so we're going to call it points ZZZZ. Now, if I come down here to the bottom and I click OK, I will have that new column, that new custom column, but it's going to be free-form text in the middle of that. And you may or may not want that, but in the case of assigning points, we don't want that because someone could enter a point of, say, 66. So we're going to then come down here to the middle of this screen, and you'll see this lookup button next to custom attributes. We're going to hit that lookup button, and here is where you have an opportunity to enter in your values. So if we were doing the Fibonacci 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. For those of you not familiar with Fibonacci, you're basically adding the previous two values, and that creates your next value, and then 13. Okay, so we got that entered in. We hit close. Now remember, you're going to remember this type which you have chosen as numbers. Now we hit OK. When we come down here to drop our column down to add that custom column, this is all alphabetical. But being that the type was number, it will show up under N, and you can see N, and I choose this point type points ZZZ, click on it, and now I have that column. And it doesn't show number in the column here. And the great thing is now when you drop this down, you have your custom numbers all in there. And you can do that for text. Like I said, I did that for epics, features and user stories. Whatever it is that your team needs to work in, you can choose that part there. Okay, now that we have our backlog set up, and this is the area, right, that usually the product owner is spending a lot of time in. They're going through there, they're adding their backlogs, they're prioritizing that. You can add a priority field here. They're prioritizing. This is the area where they probably work in the most. So I'm sorry, gotta go click. I got this number over here that's trying to say, hey, you got these number over there that doesn't match. Okay, so now the next step is the team's going to go into sprints planning, and this is where you would actually go and start mapping out your sprints. And this is so easy. It's just as drag and drop your cards into the sprint that your team deems. Now, some teams or some people will be adamant against doing any planning beyond the current sprint that they're doing in, right? They'll say, hey, the product owner or whoever's responsible for the backlog, they may update the priorities in there, or the results of the current sprint may affect what actually goes in there. And that's all true. Just as long as you understand that whatever you put in sprint 2, 3, 4, et cetera, isn't set in stone, but what it does give you is it kind of gives you that deliverable roadmap. And I have found that customers or your business or your product owner pieces that are getting the deliverables to them, they really like seeing that product delivery roadmap out, and it kind of gives the team some idea what to shoot for. Okay, so that's just something to think about here, but whatever works for your team. Now you will also notice that I have these cards set up with customized so we can display on the card what our team wants to see on our card. So how do we do that? So we'll come up here to the top, to the tab where it says format up there, and we're going to click on that. And over here on the left side of the ribbon, we have customized cards. So you'll see here are some base fields that you can toggle on and off. I like the show task ID cards, and here's why. If you start getting into your project, and within a functional area, you might have a whole bunch of user stories around one particular spot. They may have very, very similar titles, right? And so if you're in your daily stand-up or you're referencing a particular user story, oftentimes that can get confusing. With the task ID, you have a unique ID. You can say, hey, I'm referring to user story 5, and they can go see that card. Here is where it comes really powerful when you get to drop down and some of those custom fields that you created, points, owner, category, which is my epic features, and here's this point ZZZ. You don't have to have it. We'll get rid of it. You can add those to your cards. Now your cards, if you already have a storyboard on a wall, say you have your team room and you're currently using sticky notes and you're wanting to leverage the power of PPM, this really gets you into that matchy so that you're not having to deal with something that doesn't match your current team's methods, okay? So now we've gone to the second step. Remember, we're working left to right up here on this, on the ribbon, task board, which is our backlog, planning, which is the next granular step down, which we do our sprint planning. And then finally, we can come into an individual sprint. Now, if I just click on the button here, it will take me to the current sprint I'm in. However, you can do the drop down and go to a specific sprint and manage it there. So we come into the current sprint, and this is where your team can start moving its cards across as appropriate. Now, you may be looking at this going, we don't use next up, in progress, done. We use ready, doing, done, whatnot. You simply navigate your mouse over the top of any of those there, the next step, in progress, right click, rename, and you can name it whatever you want to name it right there. Okay, I'm going to leave it alone for now. So your team can start moving their cards into it at whatever they want. Now you'll notice below each of those areas is a percentage, right? Percent complete, percent complete, percent complete. By default, I had gotten rid of it. By default, the done column will come with 100% complete. So this is something to watch out for initially when you're doing the setup, because when you move a story or a card into this column, whatever you've set this completion rate at, it's automatically going to assign the completion rate to this card. And just like normal tasks, when you've been using projects for other projects that were not, say, Agile or using it in this format, if you double click on this card, you'll see it brings up that task, the same task information box we're all used to seeing. And you'll see here that percent complete is now at 100. Okay. And why is this important? Number one, when you go back to your dashboards here, or when you come back here to your backlogs, it's going to show it as 100. Number two, if you take this card, let's say you say, uh-oh, we're not 100% complete, that was a mistake, and you move it back, guess what? It's still going to show as 100% complete. And any story that you see that has this little check mark box in the top right corner means it's listed at 100%. So there's a couple ways that you can remedy that if you move it. One is just highlight the card, go back up to the top where it says task up here on the tab, and you have these percent completes up there, the 50, 25, 50, 75, and you can simply click the percentage. You'll see that the check mark box has now gone away, right? So you can also come and set a percent complete in any of these boxes. So we could set that at 50, and you could say you could automatically set it at 25. In some respects, this is really helpful that as you move these cards and it sets just a standard default percent complete, when you go doing your reporting, it gives you a really nice view into what percentage of that sprint you're going through. So it's just something else to play with and think about. I'm not going to get into too much detail. If I move this card back to 100% complete and the check mark's there showing, and now if I move it back, the check mark disappears because we have automatically assigned it that 50% complete. Okay, now as we get into our sprint planning here, here is the tip number 2 for today that I think is really important. That is, if you're new to Agile, your teams are just spinning up. Oftentimes I see teams really spin because they're starting to get in their first sprint and they want to know, I need to assign points for each of these stories, right? We need to size these. How do we know what a 1 is? How do we know what a 2 is, a 4 is? As well as we need to determine our velocity. Our velocity is how many points can the team complete in one sprint period, right? So what I recommend in this case is don't do your planning, don't do your points assignments and your sprint velocity initially. Go ahead and do your sprint. Put in some stories that you think you can accomplish. At the end, when you're doing your sprint retrospective, then go back and go, okay, we know what a 1 is, we know what a 2 is because you've actually done it. And then you can add up those points and you automatically have your velocity. Now you have your velocity, now you have your points, you have a reference, a baseline to, and you could actually do that for the first, say, 2 or 3 sprints where you don't actually assign points, but you do it retroactively and come back and do it. And I think that really helps the teams keep moving forward rather than spin and get behind trying to calculate that out. Also, tip number 4, I'm inundating you with tips, but the last tip I'm going to give you today is when you start your planning, definitely come here and do your definition of done. I see teams that are underway that this is actually an issue. They didn't get together as a team and decide what is going to be that definition of done. And depending on the team member you ask, they may have a completely different definition than each other. Say the development lead may think, oh, after I've done my development and I've done my unit testing, we're done, right? Well, to deploy to production, we all know that most enterprises, you're going to want to do some sort of user acceptance testing or whatnot before it's production ready. So that's just something to think about. Get your definition done. Some teams use done and they add another column called done. Some teams say, ready, then done. But anyway, it's something to think about so that you don't make that same mistake that early on in my career, we were trying to figure out that and we just didn't do those things. Okay, so you've learned how to customize these cards. You've learned how to customize these columns within the sprint. You know you can move these back and forth. You've learned how to take the percentage complete in each one of those. And then you're working, again, up top sprints, left to right, getting more granular as you go down, and at any time you can manage the sprints. So the last piece I said that we just do a real quick flyby because we're almost out of time is the reporting area. So you can come to report, and this dashboard is my favorite area, and this is where you can see the burn down, cost overview, upcoming tasks. This is an area that product owners love, your stakeholders love, the business sponsor loves. They love seeing these reports, and they're really, really helpful. There won't be much in them for us right now because we don't actually, in our stories, we don't have a lot of detail in them at all. So they won't show much information there, but it certainly is helpful to play around with that. And as you go through, figure out what reports work for you, and you can set some default reports. Anyway, looks like we're nearly out of time. I definitely want to thank everybody for coming out today. And if you have any questions at all, definitely reach out to us. We'd love to help you out with your Agile transformations. And as I mentioned, there will be a more in-depth training on this May 16th, which Amanda will tell you a little bit more about shortly. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining, and I will now hand you back over to Amanda.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so we will be having a follow-up of this webinar that goes a little more in depth. That will be coming up on the 16th. It's a little bit longer. It's 2 hours, so you'll get 2 PDUs from that. So if you've enjoyed the content we've gone over today, I know this was a really brief summary of it all. So for those of you that are looking to go deeper, maybe have more of a one-on-one with our instructor where we have more time to answer questions, this is definitely going to be a webinar you don't want to miss. So I dropped that registration link. That's in the chat window right now, but you can also go to our website. That's www.advisicon.com. On there, we have a public calendar and all of our events listed, as well as other webinar Wednesdays and other webinars that are coming up. So be sure to check that out. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We welcome your questions and feedback. For more information, you can email us at contact@advisicon.com. Once you exit today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation. We ask that you complete and submit this survey in order to receive your PDUs, and from there you will receive a follow-up email within 2 business days with your PDU information. If you're watching this recording on YouTube or another social media platform, please be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future uploads. And on behalf of Advisicon, Brent, and myself, we thank you for joining us today and hope to see you participate in our future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.